Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is Bill Maddox from the Carsey School of Public Policy, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the 2016 version of the Carsey SMDP webinars, but we're calling it for 2016 the Carsey Plan International SMDP webinars. The reason why is because we're very excited to announce that Plan International has joined us as a partner for 2016 and will be part of producing and actually in some cases presenting some really exciting webinars that we think that you're really, you as a either a first-time listener or someone who's been part of our webinar series, which is now 3 years old, will really enjoy. I'm going to just briefly tell you that after today's webinar, we are going to try to do almost monthly webinars. March 8th, we'll be celebrating International Women's Day, Unlocking the Power of Girls. April 6th, we'll be working with out-of-school youth through savings groups, approaches, and adaptations. May 4th, promoting gender equity through savings groups. June 15th, outside the categories of the marketplace, what should we really be measuring? And then we'll announce the remainder of the 2016 webinar series titles later on. So I want to remind you that this is being recorded, that the recording will be available at the SMDP webinar website, at the main Carsey School of Public Policy website. We keep an archive of most of the recordings for the last 3 years. The recordings are there, PowerPoints, related materials, and that'll also be the case with this webinar today. We have some links to some important books and a YouTube series and other things that will be available for you on that website. So we invite you to come. If you have to leave early for some reason, or you want to pass this along or use the webinar in some way, then by all means, you're welcome to do that. We're really excited to be here today. It is the first, as I said, of this 2016 series, and we are doing the broadcast as we usually do from Durham, New Hampshire, which happens to be just right now the center of the cyclone of the American democratic political process, where we tomorrow night we'll have a big CNN Democratic debate, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and right above me in the Huddleston Ballroom is a huge collection of media getting ready from all over the world for this big event. So it makes a kind of interesting place to be doing this broadcast from. But this is the most important thing that's happening on the Carsey screen right now is this website, this webinar. So I just wanted to mention we are kind of in the middle of this interesting time here in New Hampshire, a complex situation. And that's actually an important segue into the topic we're going to be talking about today. You know, as we do development work in the kinds of environment that we're all looking at, you know, both in our own communities and globally, we're constantly confronting a highly dynamic and highly complex world. We see this in every way, whether we're reading the newspaper or just driving across town, or in the way in which our programs are unfolding in communities. There's a lot of important things to think about rather than kind of a rote way of doing development. Development for the last 60 or 70 years has tried to come up with best practices and methodologies and ways in which we can focus on a kind of very structured way of trying to design our programs and implement them. And more than any time, I think, in the last 50 or 60 years, those methods are not working. We really have to look at a different way of understanding the context that we're doing our work in. And in fact, this whole idea of doing development differently has become a coalition. People around the world are thinking about this, talking about this, and we've actually been able to offer our first blended online course through SMDP Online, where we brought in this concept of complexity theory and dealing with complex adaptive environments to the savings group area. Really happy to have with us today Nancy Lee. Nancy Lee is from Halifax, Nova Scotia. She's part of SMDP faculty, and the person who designed and offered the first blended online course. I'll tell you more about that course later, but we are going to be spending a few minutes today. Nancy will be talking about ways to look at savings groups through this systems approach methodology or kind of a way of understanding the world that we're living in. I think that the key takeaway from, I was able to see the course as it unfolded over 5 months and see the work that students did in Zambia is that, we're really looking at a different relationship to the data that's out there. Instead of a kind of static and reliable way of looking at communities and what's happening to them and ways that we're going to implement a particular intervention, we're really looking at a environment where we are compelled to do action research. We need to collect real data in the field, that the kind of expectations of how we're going to design programs is really going to be dependent on a high level of interaction between the people that we're working with at the community level and our staff and also the greater community that we're working with, the donors and government institutions, other NGOs, religious institutions, that this is all of these different players and all of these different factors need to be thought about. So we think about this as being a complex system of understanding systems from the 30,000-foot level all the way down to the village level, but this does not have to be a complicated process. So we're going to try to unpack this today, and I want to welcome Nancy. Nancy, are you there?
Thanks, Bill. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Okay. So Nancy, I want to start out by, you've been doing development work for...
Excuse me, Bill.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Nancy, can you please accept the screen share so we can see your PowerPoint?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
I can't actually see it at the moment. We've left? Sorry.
Sorry, folks. Just getting our sea legs for our first webinar of the year here.
Can you send it to me?
Yes, hold on 1 second, please.
Sorry.
So Nancy, while we're waiting to get that up, I wanted to ask you, in your development experience, you've been doing development work for 20, 25 years and around the world. And can you kind of help us understand how the traditional ways of doing development today are really not working, and ways of thinking about a community that you've worked in where using a kind of a standardized methodology didn't make sense for that community, and that really new thinking needs to be applied. You had been telling me about an experience you had in Angola a few years ago, and could you tell us more about what was going on there and how the kind of standard way of looking at how we implement programs was just not making sense?
Sure, it's a really small example, but I think it's quite powerful. When people talk about systems and complexity, it sounds very big and very lofty, and really if we think about it as listening. So the example in Angola, we were looking at groups that this program had formed and real problems with attendance. People weren't showing up, attrition. And when we looked at the groups themselves, they were formed in groups of 20 to 25. And I asked, the local ROSCAs, the local rotating savings groups, what do they look like? What do they do? What are their size? And most people said between 10 and 12 people. And I said, so why have you organized groups in 20 to 25? And they said, because that's what we understand best practices to be. And so there's just an example of, best practices are important in learning from methodologies, but the attention to what was right in front of them in terms of what was already working, what the level of trust was in Angola around ROSCA behavior. And another quick example is Sewa Bank. I worked with Sewa in India And it's a cooperative. For those of you who don't know it, it's over 1 million women, and they use savings groups in rural areas. They call them self-help groups. And Ilabat, the founder of SEWA, is always very quick to say, our model is not replicable. It grew in a time, in a place. It was part of a labor movement, a women's movement, a Gandhian ethos at the time in the 70s. So I think those are just a couple that come to mind.
So this idea that we can kind of, we can take Hugh Allen's manual and we can just kind of drop in a village and we can implement a program and everything's just going to go swimmingly is really kind of a false construct, because if you're not paying attention to all of the other dynamics that are happening in a community, in the economy, in the culture, in the relationships between people, then you're going to be missing key data streams that might be very, very important to making the program successful, making it really effective and useful for the people that we're working with. So, well, before you launch into your presentation, I do want to let people know that you can ask questions anytime. There's a chat box. We're using the chat box feature. So if you'd kindly look on your screen and see that little bubble that says chat, find the chat box and you can type in your question into that box, and when you send it, there's a little send button on the right. Make sure you're sending it to all participants, and that way everybody can see it. If you just wanted to talk to us here at CARSI, then you would select us and send that. The other thing we want people to do, and we'll give you more instructions right after Nancy's presentation, is that we would like to invite those of you that have a microphone and would like to ask a question on the open mic to be able to do that. So you can see that if you scroll up to the top of the chat box, you can see instructions that Bianca has put there for how you can connect your mic, and then you can just raise your hand, use that little hand raising feature, and we can actually get you in there to ask a question. But let's launch into this, Nancy. We have used the title, We Make the Road by Walking, using a systems approach for savings group program design, because this really is about, it's not making it up as you go along, but it is about looking at that road and making that road as opposed to a predestined way of doing things. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, and then we'll open it up for discussion and get all of us involved in hearing about your experiences and how these concepts are really useful to what you're doing.
Great. So before I begin the presentation, we'd like to just get a little bit of a sense of who's out there, who's with us today. We have a poll set up on the side. If you could tell us, what is your experience with Savings Group? We want to have a sense of, are you practitioners? Are you working for technical support agencies? Are you donors, researchers? So that's the first question. And the second question is, where is your main area of work? And it may be more than one, we recognize, but if you could also answer that question. So we'll give you a couple of minutes. Does everyone see the poll? It should be showing up on your screen.
So besides this, you're seeing the questions on Nancy's presentation, but you also should see a poll, and just go ahead and complete the poll. And
should be something like this showing up on your screen.
Yep. Chris Tappan says yes.
Great.
Poll is visible. We'll give you about another 15, 20 seconds. Oh, it's good to see polls that don't have anything to do with Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. We're having a lot of polls in New Hampshire these days. All right. Well, if you have not had a chance, here we go. Here are the results.
Great.
So we have, I'll read these off, Nancy. Basically, we have a vast majority of people are technical support people from facilitating agencies, about 38 people. And then kind of next would be no answer. A lot of you are out there in limbo land. As far as the main areas of work where people are coming from, and we have Sub-Saharan Africa as the main, oh, I'm sorry, North America, including Mexico, and then Sub-Saharan Africa. Go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, and I'm just guessing that it's possible that those who put no answer may be working in more than one context.
Okay, great. Right, well, thank you for that.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And we'll keep that in mind going forward. So let me just do a quick overview oops, I need to, sorry, I'm trying to move this. You're seeing the poll, aren't you?
Nope, we're seeing the systems thinking slide.
Great. So just to quickly go over the difference between systems thinking and conventional thinking, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in concrete terms. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the theory, but just that we understand that systems thinking is really just an admission that we don't have the whole picture. We never have the whole picture. We're seeing part of the elephant, if you like, and that it's not only many connected, it's not only a system or ecosystem, it's many systems and many players or stakeholders. That change is historical, contextual, and it's emerging. It's constantly changing. As Bill said, you know, we've always been living in unpredictable times, but we really need a way that we can quickly adapt to changes as they occur. So as compared to getting the methodology right and replicating it, what we really want to do is try something, monitor it very well, and then adapt. We're also, instead of focusing on goals and results or outputs, you're focusing, you're bringing your level up to vision and strategy. Your strategy is clear, what you're trying to accomplish, your overall outcomes. But that allows you some room to play and adapt. And, you know, as I was saying about the best practices of 20 per group, that may be a best practice in certain countries, but it certainly wasn't for Angola. So being able to really focus on what works here and now, critical. So what we're going to do is do a little bit of systems analysis in practice. Where have we seen wide scale and impact of savings groups? What were the methodologies used? And we're going to take a step back and say, what was the contextual reality? What were the various systems at play? And what might need to be considered in terms of adapting these successes? Because we have a growing body of literature and practice now in the savings group sector. We know a lot of things that are working and a lot of things that are working well. What we don't know is how well those translate across different contexts and different sociocultural environments. So we're going to turn to Kenya, and we're going to turn to some recent data. Kenya is one of the most inclusive financial sectors, and one of the countries where they really managed to scale savings groups substantially. And two, I noticed that we have some friends and colleagues here from CRS. I didn't see CARE, but we may have some friends here from CARE. CRS and CARE are two of the leaders in terms of outreach and scale in the world, but also in Kenya. And so what I'm going to do here is just go through this study. It was a study by Financial Sector Deepening Trust in Kenya just last year in 2015. And we're going to look at outreach in the broadest sense. When we talk about scale, we're not just talking about breadth of outreach or numbers. We're talking about scale that's sustainable, that's safe, and that really addresses our other goals of poverty or exclusion. So if we look at this study, they were comparing the two methodologies, and this helps us to really look at what worked in wide outreach. So in terms of numbers, we see the numbers CRS and CARE. We see the cost of outreach during the project. So we see that CRS is significantly more expensive than CARE, and we're going to see why when we drill down. So the delivery mechanisms are a little bit different. Many of you may be familiar with CRS's PSP model. So a highly standardized and systematized model of training community-based trainers, licensing them, having an apprentice system, and in some countries networks. They did this in Kenya, and a fairly again systematic post-project strategy to really exit from the project. So in comparison to CARE, where they really focused on partnering with local organizations, franchising through local businesses, and faith-based organizations. And those organizations or agencies were paid on a commission by member basis. In terms of the methodology, much more organic and flexible than CRS. So I would say less standardized, a lot more variation in the methodology. And we're not placing any value judgments here. We're just looking at the numbers and what really worked in terms of different elements of outreach. And what we begin to see that's interesting is, if we ask, now, who was more successful in outreach, CRS or CARE? It really depends what you're looking at, because what we understand in outreach, and we understand this more broadly in savings groups and microfinance, is there are tensions between elements of outreach. So while in terms of breadth or scale numbers, CARE clearly was able to reach larger numbers at lower costs. Now, on the other hand, in terms of sustainability of the group or self-reliance of the group, CRS was able to lay down a methodology that we're fairly confident is going to continue quality and continue to go on post-project. They spent a lot of time on ensuring post-project continuity. On the other hand, groups through CRS tend to be more reliant on trainers for more complex things like share out, and they use a more complex bookkeeping system. They use ledgers. So CARE, less reliant on trainers, you saw more group-to-group replication, and they're using a mix of passbook and ledgers. So a slightly different record-keeping methodology. In terms of returns back to the group level. So if we think about when the groups share out, what each member is receiving back in terms of the shared capital of the group, we have a few different levers that we can play with in terms of our savings group design. So the size of the group, of course, the more people, the more savings, the more you can lend out. It's lending out where the group really grows its internal fund, of course, because that's where they earn interest. Also fees and fines. So when we look at CRS, we see that they save more and they're more likely to meet weekly. So that frequency also has the ability to try to grow the internal fund. CRS has smaller groups, and so again, limiting the smaller the group, the less you have in terms of capital for growth. CARE, on the other hand, borrowing more likely to meet monthly and larger groups. So again, they're using different mechanisms for growing the internal funds. In terms of risk management, CRS clearly came out better. So of all of the members interviewed in the study, 0.8 reported losses, and they were less likely to have multiple memberships in other types of groups. In terms of CARE, between 3.4 and 7.7% in the two areas where CARE was working, reported losses, and more likely to have multiple memberships in a number of groups, so a greater risk of indebtedness. In terms of depth or poverty, there was no major difference between CRS and CARE, and there was no major difference with the control groups as well. So I want to put this back out to the group. When we look at these different outreach strategies between CRS and CARE, what are the levers of outreach? In other words, what do we have to play with at the program design level in order to enhance outreach, be it breadth of outreach, cost of outreach, returns, or sustainability, risk? Let's hear from folks who have microphones. What are the levers of outreach that we have to play with at the program level?
So I'm not sure if we have any microphones that are unmuted. However, you can certainly type into the chat box.
And can we unmute the microphones?
If people want to try to, so I actually have a hand from Cindy. I'm sorry, from Zama Zulu.
Great.
I don't know if Zama is wanting to talk, but if so, then we can open up the mic for Zama.
Zama, I'm going to unmute your mic. And your mic
I'm sorry, actually, it was the time when I didn't see the slides. It's not that I want to talk, sorry.
So Zama, the question is in terms of savings group design, what are the levers of outreach? What are the things that we can actually kind of adjust in order to impact how we're able to provide outreach for the program? If you don't feel like you want to speak on mic, that's fine. Anybody else? Any other hands out there? Okay, Nancy, we're not getting a...
Feel free to type it into the chat box as well. So, and let me give you an example just to start you off. So I started off by talking about the size of the group in Angola. And of course, the size of the group is going to affect the returns of the group. The size of the group is how much money is being saved, and then how much can be lent out, and how much can be earned, which will later be shared out by the members. So the size of the group is one lever that we have to play with. The size of the group. Looking at the differences between CRS and CARE, can you identify any other levers? This is the areas that we have to play in terms of program design, to tweak, to adjust to our context.
Saying regular meetings, weekly versus monthly.
Jordan was in our distance course. So welcome back, Jordan.
Here we go. David Panetta says, facilitator caseloads, duration of training period, frequency of facilitator visits, facilitator transportation.
Let's take one at a time. So,
okay. Go ahead.
So Jordan, you said the frequency of meeting. Absolutely. The frequency of meeting is one of the levers we have to play with. How the more frequently you're meeting, the greater ability to grow the fund in terms of savings. And David, you mentioned the length of training. Absolutely. The delivery mechanism in terms of training, in terms of monitoring, how efficient that system is going to affect costs, but also how effectively it's done is going to affect the sustainability or the quality of the group. So David had a few there. Can you read that again?
Yeah, he also has frequency of facilitator visits, facilitator transportation, a CBT model, and cost sharing with members and community.
Yes, he had, so all of these relate to the outreach mechanism, the delivery mechanism, the method that you're using for village trainers. So the efficiency of that process, the efficiency and the effectiveness of that process. And of course, the cost of the transportation that you mentioned, David, that is going to really depend on the population density in the country.
Melaknesh Ali says, I think that one of the levers will be minimum savings. So
one of the levers
will be minimum savings. So
the minimum, yes, the minimum amount of savings. So the policies that the group decides around how much savings, obviously the higher that minimum is, the greater the ability for that group to grow their fund.
Yep.
But you also want that to be accessible for members in terms of who can and can't save, the amount that they're able to save. So a number of levers affecting cost of outreach, and this one affecting returns, and also potentially affecting who's included, who could be part of that group, the minimal savings. Any other levers?
I think we've exhausted the levers for now.
Great. The content of the training, what we do, again, back to the whole training and monitoring system. I mean, and we can really pull apart. There are a number of factors in that to look at, and David mentioned a number of them, but we can look at the entire structure of that system and how community-based trainers are used. An example, for example, Plan in Burkina Faso, they used village agents not to train new groups, but only to supervise, so able to cut down some costs, gain some efficiencies there, affecting the cost of outreach during the project. So again, thinking of these levers, we have a number of different levers that affect different elements of outreach, including scale, cost, safety, returns, how we play with them in our context, and which ones are really going to matter in our context is a part of really thinking contextually in a systems approach. So let me go forward. Now, just to share a little bit more from the study about the context of Kenya. Now, we've been looking at 100 feet. So we've been looking at the program level saying, what did CRS do? What did CARE do? Now we want to take it up to the context of Kenya. So what we learned from this study is that we're reaching that the savings groups programs are reaching the poor, not necessarily the poorest, that half of the savings groups already existed in some group, some ROSCA, some producer association, some ASCA, 20% saving in a bank, 58% saving in secret hiding places, 51% have used mobile phones to save money. And how are savings groups different than existing ROSCAs and ASCAs in Kenya? Well, what they found were project form groups were smaller, better attended, they were more likely to save and lend more, they had larger share outs, more likely to have social funds, and better at risk management. In other words, lower percentage of losses. A third of the groups were formed by nearby members of groups, so group replication or community trainers. And roughly 29% of community-based trainers got their income from working with savings groups, roughly $220 a month. Women strongly represented in group leadership across the board, except as chair, where they tended to be less represented. And in terms of financial literacy of members, 63% knew their savings balance. So what I want to ask you, we were talking at 100 feet about the program and how we design savings groups programs. What are the levers that we have to affect different elements of outreach? Now I want you to come up to 30,000 feet and ask you the question, what matters about the Kenyan context in order to achieve the scale that was achieved by these programs? So for systems thinking, we really want to be sure that we've mastered the contextual analysis, not just an understanding of best practices or things that are working, principles that are working, strategies that are working, but a sound understanding of what that means in this context. So what we want to be able to do is work at 100 feet, the program level, the technical level, and 30,000 feet at the same time. So what are the levers of scale at 100 feet? And at 30,000 feet, what is important about the Kenyan context, to understand in terms of levers? So let's go back. What are the different systems at play here in the context of Kenya? How was this level of scale, this level of outreach possible in Kenya? What is important about the context of Kenya? So you can talk about any type of system. You can talk about the financial landscape. You can talk about the donor landscape. You have some hints here in terms of the study. Can we hear from a couple of people, or have you write a note in the chat? What about the Kenyan context allowed for this scale to happen, do you think? Any hands? Or?
So is Kenya unique?
Well, it's asking in what ways Kenya is unique in this
So David Panetta has offered that the history of community-based microfinance, the prevalence of existing and traditional savings groups,
Absolutely.
multiple financial service providers, even in rural and low-income segments, and the willingness and effectiveness of the community-based trainers. Thank you, David.
Absolutely. All of those elements. Kenya has a prevalence of ROSCAs and ASCAs. It's not very common to find such sophisticated ASCAs throughout even Eastern Africa. And so all of these factors, he mentioned the prevalence of the existing community-based, you mentioned the community-based trainers. What about the community-based trainers did you find to be specific to Kenya? Oh, sorry, we have some other points.
Yeah, Fred Schlegel says cultural willingness. So,
cultural willingness, that's interesting. So you know, we're talking about socio-cultural systems here. And this relates a little bit, I think, to what David was saying about the community-based trainers. How do we get at that? Can someone elaborate a bit more what you mean by that? What about the culture in Kenya allowed for scale? Is it all of Kenya?
Do we have any Kenyans that want to comment? Truly Zondi is saying using existing groups, so the idea of kind of an overlay on existing ROSCAs and things like that.
Absolutely, and the prevalence of them, and David also spoke to the prevalence of other financial institutions as well, the inclusion in the sector as a whole. But most savings groups programs are planning to or aim to build on existing ROSCAs and ASCAs. So for those of you who talked about culture, is there something contextual about Kenya? Is there something culturally specific here that's beyond the prevalence of ROSCAs and ASCAs?
I was muted. So David is offering more entrepreneurial CBTs in some countries. In other countries, the CBTs simply view the opportunity as an entry point to employment and are disappointed when that does not materialize. So it's really kind of having people that, whether they learn entrepreneurship, which is debatable, whether people can actually learn to be entrepreneurs or they have that kind of predisposition to hustle and get out there and really, you know, create the opportunity for people to join groups. That really can be a big difference.
So that entrepreneurial element, to what extent it's cultural, because some people even argue that in Kenya, different parts of Kenya are more entrepreneurial than others. So even within Kenya itself.
And David also adds that might depend on how the opportunity is communicated by the facilitating agency. So, you know, it's about, you know, creating that kind of permission or the kind of license for an individual to go out there, you know, whether that's done through proper training or some kind of a competitive scheme or whatever, but that's, you know, really key. You essentially do what your, you know, guidance is or what your predisposition is. Absolutely.
So what is the mix of incentives, training, building on existing entrepreneurs or that allows for this to be fostered? Great. Any other comments before I want to finish up here and just open it up to questions. But I think you can see kind of a little bit where we're going with this. And what I want to say is, you know, this isn't anything new for good programming. Good programming has always taken into account context and the various systems at play. So again, systems being plural, sociocultural systems, issues of gender and entrepreneurial spirit, of the donor landscape, what's been invested, by whom, with what agenda, what is the existing landscape of ROSCAs and ASCAs? Is it like that throughout the country? Is it more prevalent in rural areas? What's the existence of faith-based organizations? What's the level of financial institution inclusion? So just very quickly before I turn it back to you, we had as part of the course that we did a distance course, as Bill mentioned earlier, over 5 months. It ended in Zambia. And in the distance course, students were doing action research in their own communities. As I said, we have Jordan with us now. And at the end, we ended a week in Zambia. And in Zambia, we did a little bit of practice of this contextual analysis, really through secondary readings. But we looked at policy and regulatory, gender and sociocultural. We looked at a FinScope study that did a review of the financial landscape, including informal groups and savings groups. We looked at mobile use. And what the class came up with is, I'm not going to get into all the scenarios, but what I will mention is we did some scenario analysis in generation. And what the class came up with is, in order for savings groups to scale in Zambia, 3 things need to really be taken into account. One is capturing the youth, that 60% of the population are under 35 years old, and they form 58% of the excluded population. They also noted that even though the use of mobile technology is not as high as in places like Kenya or Uganda, the growth rate is extremely high of adoption. And so it's not just what's happening now, but the trend is really likely to take off. So cracking the technology nut, using mobile and other forms of technology for banking, training, and monitoring will be key. And also adapting and streamlining the methodology. Really have to look at, because some of the methodologies like CRS are as we saw, more cost intensive and more resource intensive. In the context of Zambia, where you don't have the prevalence of ASCAs and ROSCAs, you don't have the donor landscape, and you don't have the population density or the financial sector inclusion, then in order for it to work, you really have to look at how to streamline the methodology without losing quality and safety. So I want to take this back to you again and just ask you to bring it back to your context. We were talking about Kenya and what was contextually key about savings group scaling in Kenya. What from that experience might be applicable to your context, and what might need to be adapted or considered to scale savings groups in your own context? So let's hear from you again.
So I'm going to actually introduce something that I'm kind of chatting offline here with Marshall Anala from Ghana, he's interested in looking at mobile-based ways of doing savings groups. And the reason why is because armed robbery cases are really on the uptick. I was talking to a Ghanaian friend of mine yesterday, and that was one of the things she said, is that armed robbery is affecting, microfinance. It's affecting kind of all parts of life. So here's a really concrete example of the complexity of the world we live in today, and how if you designed a savings group program for Ghana, you may not have originally considered what implications armed robbery would have, but you clearly need to. Clearly that would be something along the way that you would have to kind of think about. So I'm just throwing that out there as an example of how conditions on the ground can be quite different than sitting at your computer envisioning how a program is going to go down, and then it's really about how do we make this safe, how do we make it effective, how do we achieve our objectives, but not put people at risk.
Yeah, and safety might be a higher priority in some contexts, absolutely. What about others?
I'm looking for hands up of anybody who would like to ask a question or make a comment, or you can type it in to the box here.
So what might need to be considered or adapted to scale savings group in your context? What are the systems at play? What are the sociocultural systems, the financial landscape, the ASCAs, the ROSCAs? What successes from Kenya carry over to your context? What elements?
or maybe you have an example of a challenge that you've dealt with on the ground in designing your programs that maybe wasn't anticipated, but that you were able to come up with a workaround for. It's a quiet group out there so far.
We can hear you.
Don't be bashful. We'd like to hear from you. And we appreciate those people who have already spoken up.
So think about where you're operating and what we analyzed in terms of what was analyzed in the study with respect to Kenya, and the levers for scale and outreach within the program, but also what was important contextually in order to support that at 30,000 feet. So we want you to then bring that a little bit back to your own context and just ask, you know, what's important? So safety was important in that last example. What's important in your context to consider? What's really key? Is mobile banking taking off? What's the trend? Are there trends? Are there demographic trends that matter? What are the donors doing? Where are they investing? Does that matter? What are the banks doing? Entrepreneurial.
On Kenya.
Great.
Can you go back to that slide?
Kenya?
Yeah.
Are we hearing from anyone? No.
No.
Why don't we open it up to questions then? If people don't have more answers to that question.
So Thulani Zondi is saying the lever of agreed minimum amount of savings and possible incentives for those contributing more is applicable for our South African context.
So the minimal savings, that's a lever at the program design level. Is there something contextually?
Thulani, could we open up your microphone and you could tell us a little more?
Tell us what's important in South Africa to consider in terms of adapting these methodologies or models.
Thulani, I've unmuted your mic.
Thulani, do you want to add anything about your context?
About South Africa?
Thulani might not have a microphone.
Or feel free to type it as well.
Bill, we do have 3 other people with their hands raised.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm going to go up there and find them. I can't see that.
Okay, not a problem.
Right
now we have
Marshall and and then Berkey. So why don't we'll open up first to Marshall. Marshall, do you want to say something on mic? Could you unmute Marshall's?
Marshall, I just unmuted your mic.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. It's afternoon in Ghana, and we are glad to be participating. In Ghana, currently, in the first 2 years of our project, we had about 40 service groups that came up. But we adopted the use of the village agents, and now we have over 180 service groups. So the use of the village agents for implementation makes it down to earth for the community people, and they are easily accepted because they are within their context. Because of the fear of one day the project leaving and the fear of the service box being taken away from them. But the use of the village agents is currently really helping in the expansion of service groups. We've grown from 40 to over 180 in less than 9 months, which is helping. The other challenge which I was trying to was the use of the mobile phone service. as at September last year, we had about 3 armed robbery cases because they were close to share out and had a substantial amount in their account, in their box. Some groups had up to, let's say, $5,000 in their savings box, and that was attracting armed robbery and even direct attacks. Some were receiving notification of being robbed within the period. So it will be a good thing for us to introduce the mobile savings in Ghana. The challenge is the mobile savings or mobile network savings in Ghana just started recently, and it's currently expensive because when you transfer money from your account to another account, you pay 1% of the value, and that makes it expensive. When you are withdrawing money from your mobile money, you are charged 1% of the value of money you are withdrawing, and that is going to cause a challenge because the person will be losing 1% of each transaction. So, for instance, if a savings group member is going to transfer, takes a loan and it is put onto the mobile system, and it's about $100. To cash out that $100 will mean you lose 1% of that, and that is 99. You'll be left with 99, and that also affects the transaction because each time you withdraw, you are charged 1%.
Yeah.
And also to even hello.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So then that's just the issue. But the other thing we would like to adapt more is introducing savings groups for youth. Because as part of our project, we have the Youth in Livelihood, where youth are being introduced to various livelihoods because of the unemployment situation in Ghana. And it will be very interesting to introduce to them, the youth, for them to be able to run that alongside so they can raise funds to run the various skills that they'll be introduced to. So to us in Ghana, I think it's a good thing for the youth to be introduced to the SG.
Thank you. Marshall, can I ask you a question about Ghana? A couple of things.
Yes.
I'm wondering what the existence of the Susu collector, how that influences savings groups and Susu groups, and also if you have information about the demographics around youth. So again, bringing it back to the context, asking what in our context, may be a real driver in terms of savings group adaptation. So I'm wondering about the Susu collectors and their influence on the methodologies or Susu groups.
Currently, in Susu groups, there's not much impact or effect on the savings groups because they are made to understand that the Susu groups, when you pay, for instance, you pay for 30 days, the last day goes to the Susu collector. But in this case, you don't lose your last savings. So, there's no way it's affecting them. But it also helps initially to understand the importance of savings. So with the Susu group, there's no negative effect on them currently, on the savings groups.
And is there any use of Susu collectors in terms of community-based trainers, the Susu collector, the individual collectors?
No. What is happening is that the Susu collectors are running the Susu business as a business. And the only way we can bring them in is to be able to pick up the money to the banks. But the other challenge is the credibility of the Susu collector as a project. If at the community level they are able to assess the Susu collector and they are okay with the Susu collector and they want to use, they are open to all avenues or all opportunities on how they want to run the service groups within the various communities. But for us as a project to introduce them to a particular Susu collector is not going to be helpful to us. Even with the banking system, we have given them the opportunity to have forums with various banks, and they will choose which bank they think they are comfortable with and which bank they want to work with.
Okay.
So with the Susu collector. Yeah.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.
We also have a comment from Masheka Zindula, which we also know him as Berkey. Could we open up Berkey's mic? Masheka. Bianca.
Okay, Bill, 1 second, please. And Masheka, your mic has been unmuted.
Berkey, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Hello, William.
Good to hear your voice.
And everybody, how are you? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the floor. It's a pleasure to participate in this webinar of today.
You're speaking from Kinshasa, from DRC?
From Bukavu, Eastern DRC.
Okay. Please go ahead. Uh-oh, did we lose Berkey? Hello? Technology was working so well.
If you'd like, I can try to unmute and remute his mic and see if that helps establish the connection again. Okay.
Yeah. Are there any comments, meanwhile, in the chat?
Yes, while we're working to get Berkey back. So Philip Acosta has said in the Mozambican context to leverage the reach of savings groups, a serious investment.
But the war?
Oh, Berkey,
yeah.
Sorry, Berkey.
Yes, sir.
We couldn't hear you before, so you can start over right now, and we'll get back to Philip's question. You kind of disappeared, so go ahead and start your question or your comment.
Okay. I was saying that against the long period of war in Congo, first, and against of the state's failure to provide basic needs to population, people in Congo, in DRC, have developed a mechanism of coping strategies that help themselves to come through or to get a resilience from poverty. But the problem of DRC context is meanwhile they were developing coping strategy. I mean, there is many international NGOs who came with some help that develop in people the culture of the culture of aid. As I saw in the context of Kenya, it will be now to the motivation to the trainers, community trainers. You see, there is a problem here when we ask donors money to pay the community trainers. They don't accept salaries. They like want people to work free, and without that, trainers are not committed to the saving group at that initiation to break the aid culture to the saving group.
So you're saying that people expect to kind of get this for free because they've been getting everything else for free, and then the idea of actually having to pay for a community-based trainer is a hard sell.
Yeah, true. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a challenge to deal with.
It's a big one. Mm-hmm.
I just want to make a quick announcement that we're at the top of the hour, and we're going to go over because we have some good questions here, so I don't want to lose the opportunity to have a discussion, and we have a couple of announcements afterwards. So, Nancy, do you have any comments related to what Berkey said? And otherwise, I will go on to fill up those comments.
No, we can go on to others. I think that's likely to be in many cases where, just the sheer amount of donor presence and subsidy and is going to affect, that entrepreneurial, that both willingness to save and pay the CBTs, as you said.
Yeah, that's something that, again, having the opportunity to really understand communities and listen to communities is going to get you to a place where you know that this is something you have to work around. You have to figure out a way to make the value proposition to people that this is going to be different than other experiences they might have had with development organizations. So I'm going to go on to Filipa Costa, who is from Mozambique. Filipa says, in the Mozambican context, to leverage reach of savings groups, a serious investment is required in the coordination of all stakeholders in order to avoid duplication of resources and mainly to prevent groups to receive different methodologies training. I have found in many regions, groups having previous training from 2 or 3 different methodologies left with no follow-up and no successful results. But cracking the, I'm just going to go on to our last comment, but cracking the technology is also essential. Mobile phones are widely used, but still a lot of work needs to be done to create greater confidence among users. Yeah, great comments.
Great. And we have Kristen Iverson too.
Yep, my friend Kristen says, the Norwegian Association of Disabled is working specifically on inclusive savings groups in Uganda that have a minimum of 60% persons with disabilities. We find that the length and content of the training is key in terms of group quality and sustainability. In order to facilitate cultural willingness for inclusion and to mobilize persons with disabilities, that has to be factored in. Working with disabled people's organizations and local leaders need to be part of the program design. So it's really about kind of getting everybody kind of on the same page and making sure that people see this as something that they are going to be a driver, someone who's going to make it happen, not just something that's going to be done to them or for them.
And I would just also add, the length and the content of training is key. That really is key probably in all contexts. Finding that sweet spot of being as efficient as possible, cost effective as possible in terms of that process without compromising the quality and the continuity. So we had a participant, for example, in Dominican Republic who had really streamlined her training. Right back, it was extremely streamlined. It was on video, mobile, and we still have to see the results. You know, she's still rolling out her program, but that question about how much is enough, you know, can all programs can't necessarily afford to do what Catholic Relief Services has done, for example, to that extent. So what is the length and content of training that works? What is that sweet spot in each of your contexts?
Well, this has been great. Everybody had to kind of warm up to the discussion and the idea of actually talking on mic. It's something we don't do very often, but we're going to try to do more of during this year. But you know, hearing from you and hearing about your challenges is really what makes this a rich experience. So I want to thank everybody that either typed in a question or came on mic and were able to talk with us. I wanted to just make a quick plug for the April 6th webinar because there was a question that Marshall had brought up about working with youth and youth savings groups. Is that the CARSI plan webinar for April 6th is working with out-of-school youth through savings groups, approaches, and adaptations, and we'll be looking at some successful models where youth were incorporated into savings groups. So, and I want to thank you, Nancy, for your time, and I want to mention to people that we are going to be rerunning and reoffering the course that Nancy taught last year. We're not sure if we're going to do it as a blended course or we're going to do it as only an online course, but the course is Savings Groups Building Scale and Impact Through Adaptation and Experimentation. We'll be announcing that in a few weeks. The course will run about 4.5 months online. It's a very much what we call a think, do type of training where it's not just going to be coming online and you know, reading some modules and having a few chats. You're really going to have to get out into your communities and do some action research and bring that back to the classroom. So it's a very rich experience. It was really successful when we did it last year, and we're really excited about doing it again. We probably will have a little promotional introductory webinar that we'll be announcing related to that once we're have the details. I also wanted to mention a few other important things, so please pay attention. Our friends over at SEEP are starting their webinar series, and we'll be doing their first webinar on Wednesday, February 17th, 9 to 10:30 a.m., so an hour-and-a-half webinar. That's U.S. Eastern Time, a global view of linkages, reflections from the State of the Linkage Report. So this is a report that was done with Barclays and CARE and Plan UK to look at what's going on with linkages in the world. So it'll be a great webinar. Please sign up for that. If you're interested in looking at how these concepts we've been talking about today around complexity theory and adaptive complex systems gets applied to market development, there's an excellent online course being offered called Understanding Markets as Complex Systems. It's an online course for market development practitioners. We'll put a link up along with other resource information. This is going to be taught by Mary Morgan, who's been in the field for decades, and she's doing this through her new Inclusive Markets Institute. I also want to let you know that we will, within a day, we'll have the recording for this webinar up with the PowerPoint, and also some links to that I think Nancy is providing right there. One is this blog of Doing Development Differently, or I'm sorry, that's the, Nancy, Doing Development Differently is actually an association of practitioners that are trying to look at a different approach to doing development, looking at complex systems approaches, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And then I'd like to promote a book that I've been reading that I think is very useful. It's not about savings groups in particular. It's about aid and development in general, Aid on the Edge of Chaos by Ben Ramalingam. We will put a link up to that, but that's a really excellent resource that I think kind of explains why we need to abandon the approaches we've been using for the last, 40, 50 years and look at a different approach. And he gives some very good examples of how those approaches can be applied. And the United Nations organizations are looking at that. We need to mute Berkey's mic. And finally, there's if you're interested in learning more about complexity from a real kind of economic standpoint, the big picture and how it's applicable, there's a great YouTube series called Complexity Economics, and we'll put the link up for that. Well, we want to thank everybody for being part of our first webinar, our CARSI Plan webinar 2016, and want to invite you back on March 8th. We'll be celebrating International Women's Day, Unlocking the Power of Girls. And I again want to thank Nancy Lee from Halifax, who is a person who thinks deeply about this work and is able to apply it both in the work that she does domestically in Canada and internationally. And we really appreciate having her on as our presenter today. And I want to thank everybody else for having us as one of your things you're doing today. Make sure if you weren't able to pay attention to the whole thing, you can come back and listen to the recording. And I want to wish you a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all. Bye.